Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Die Hard MMA podcast. I'm your host, as always, Clint McLean. What is going on, diehards? Today we are going to break down UFC Fight Night 146 on ESPN Plus, Saturday, March 9th at 8 p.m. We are going to Wichita, and the main event is Junior Dos Santos versus Derek the Black Beast Lewis. First things first, let's do a little recap of UFC 235. We went 4-3 for plus 2.35 units, and man, was that close to being a good night. Oh, it was heartbreaking. It's amazing. Coming off of another winning night, plus 2.35 units. I should be very satisfied with that, but I'm not. I am so upset. We were so close to a massive, massive score. So let's do a real quick recap. We don't always do this, but this was a really exciting night of fights, and it had a lot of crazy stuff happen. So I kind of want to touch base on it real quick. First and foremost, we got our night started with the immortal Diego Sanchez wrecking house as a plus 235 underdog. Boy, did we get that pick ever so perfectly. I told y'all that Mickey Gall is just untested and Diego Sanchez is the cardio king. Unless you're a power striker, you're not going to touch that kid. Diego's crazy. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he has an iron, unbreakable will. The only way to stop him is to shut his lights off, and a kid like Mickey Gall just cannot pull that kind of a thing off. Then we scored with the amazing and entertaining Johnny Walker landing a first-round KO. We called that one to a T as well, but it was insane because he hurt himself by celebrating at the end of the fight. He was flopping around trying to do his worm afterward and dislocated his freaking shoulder. Reports have come out today. He's doing fine, so they expect him to be able to bounce back pretty quick, and they're actually looking for a fight with Alexander Gustafsson, and let me tell you, I love that fight. I actually got into a bit of a Twitter war with a troll regarding that fight who's an Alexander fanboy. So this is kind of hilarious because I said Johnny Walker would KO Alexander Gustafsson as well. So let's hope that pans out for me so I can win a Twitter battle. Our parlay of Ben Askren and Zabit Magomedsharipov cashed very easily. That was a really, really nice parlay. I really am glad that we ended up doing that. It was a bummer that the parlay had to get adjusted, but you know what? It worked. Zhang was a nice cash for us as well. That fight went pretty to script. The only problem was the next three fights. Man, so we lost a unit on Askren by decision because boy did Robbie Lawler come out to fight. He looked like he was in phenomenal shape, and that was not something that I was expecting. I really thought we were going to get a questionable worn version of Robbie, but this is where, you roll your dice, you close your eyes, and then you pray to the MMA gods because Askren got the stoppage by submission, and it was probably a really terrible stoppage. And the way that Robbie Lawler was beating his face in before that, we very well may have lost that bet. So we lost the Askren by decision, but we cast our Askren and Zabit parlay, so we'll take it. Those units wash each other out, and we'll thank... Like I said, we'll thank the MMA gods that one went in our favor because that very easily could have been stopped in the first round with Robbie putting the beating on Askren that really would have messed our night up because we would have lost 2 units instead of breaking even. Next up, we had Cody Garbrandt inside the distance, and I tweeted out that the KO prop was actually a lot better. We took inside the distance at plus 150 and the KO prop was plus 200, and that fight went about as perfect to script as I could have anticipated it. I said that he had a speed advantage. I said that he had a skill advantage. And if he played it right, like when he fought Dominic Cruz, he would eventually KO Munoz. But I guess Garbrandt got rattled and decided to throw the game plan out the window. He decided to brawl, and man, that was fun to watch. They both threw caution to the winds and just started swinging and hammering each other. Unfortunately, Garbrandt does have a questionable chin. Munoz does not. If Garbrandt had kept to the script and he had played smart and used his speed and his advantage, we would have gotten that fight done. I promise you he would have gotten that fight done inside the distance. But he decided to go for another slugfest, and that cost us a little bit. However, he landed some massive shots, and he wobbled Munoz a couple of times, so plus 200 with that kind of a slugfest going on, that's value, ladies and gents. I don't care what anybody else says. Even though he had a terrible game plan, the fact that we didn't play him straight, we didn't lay minus 170, we took him by KO at plus 200. You want to have two guys stand in the middle of the cage and hit each other in the face until one of them drops, and then you're going to give plus 200 on one guy versus the other? I'll take that all day, especially when we had the faster, more powerful striker of the two. Unfortunately, Munoz had a better chin that night and we missed out, but I'll take it. It's okay. After that, we had the main event for us, which was the actual co-main event with Tyron Woodley, and it was very unfortunate because he just came out flat. He came out absolutely flat, and that was disappointing to see because our inside the distance bet really... we had no hope of cashing. And if you follow me on Twitter, I tweeted out this crazy parlay with like 4 over-under totals, and it came down to the co-main event not going the distance. We had the under 4.5 rounds, and I think it was the end of round 3 or the end of round 4, and they just started hammering on each other, and that's kind of what I expected to happen a little earlier in the fight. They were too tired to put each other away. At that point, I would have rather had Woodley go out on his shield, let Usman knock Woodley out, because we were going to lose our inside the distance bet anyway, but then the parlay would have cashed. So it was kind of disappointing to have nobody go unconscious in that fight. So a bit of a rough patch to end the night, but we called everything perfectly to start it. At least we went positive. We are still undefeated in 2019. The record comes to 27-14 plus 23.82 units. Boy, does that feel good. Now, before we get started on UFC Wichita, I do want to take just a second for a public safety announcement. Now, those of you who are bettors, you should know this. Those of you who are recreational bettors may not, and those of you who are new to sports betting definitely don't know this. In order to be a successful sports bettor, you actually need to shoot to win 55%. If you're winning 55% of all the bets that you make, you will be a successful sports handicapper. You will be turning a profit on all of your sports betting. Now, something to keep in mind is you can't do a whole lot better than that. That's why the book wins, because it is very, very hard to win more than 55%, which is something that we're currently doing. What that means is that we are gonna lose. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. It is inevitable that we are going to eventually lose on one of these fight nights. Now, I hate to say that because I do want to stay undefeated and I would love to keep winning and putting money in people's pockets with this podcast, but it's just completely unrealistic. So tail at your own risk. I'm giving you my opinions. I'm giving you the bets that I'm going to make, but that doesn't mean that you have to. Nobody's forcing you to make these bets. So if you do tail me, eventually the tide will turn. Eventually we will have some losing nights. It's gonna happen. So just remember I warned you before that happens. Now, before we get into Wichita one more time, I want to give a shout out to YouTube and all of my new followers on YouTube, because I have been uploading the podcast to YouTube to make sure it gets out there to a couple of extra people, and we got 127 views on UFC 235's breakdown. Believe it or not, that's actually a record for me. So I just want to give a big thank you to everybody who's subscribed to me on YouTube, and a shout out to Hold'em, who commented and asked if I could talk a little bit more about how I pick my picks. He asked me to explain a little bit more about like the statistics or the subjective and objective details that go into actually deciding what my picks will be. And I actually think that's going to be a fun little thing for me to discuss. I would like to do an episode dedicated completely to that. I want to do kind of a betting boot camp for the Die Hard MMA podcast and all of my followers, and really give you some insight into how I come to the conclusions I do for my picks. The only problem is I think that's going to be a little bit more in depth. So I want to sprinkle a little bit for you. That way you're not disappointed. Hold'em, thank you so much for the question, and I will get into that. I want to do it for everybody and make sure it's not rushed and it's something that everybody can understand. So I know that was a little bit longer of an intro than we're used to here on the Die Hard MMA podcast, but I really want to build a network and a culture and really a group or a friendship with all my listeners, so I'm glad I got a chance to take a minute to do that. So if anybody out there has another question for me that you want me to address or something like that, feel free to fire them at me. I'll be happy to read through them and I'll try to address them in the next episode. So without further ado, let's get into UFC Fight Night Wichita. For now, this fight night is going to be a little bit different than most of the other ones. Rather than running through all of these and giving individual plays, we have a very set strategy for this particular fight. I'm actually only going to break down and go over 4 fights. That's right, you heard me. We're going to go over 4 MMA fights for UFC Wichita because those are the only 4 that we care about at this point. Now, I may find other plays that I like when the props come out, or if there's line movement, things like that drive me one direction or another. But at this point, these are my 4 favorite picks on the entire night. And like I said, we have a specific strategy that I'll explain for you here in just a second. Now, there may be other plays that I like a little bit later on, like I said, so give me a follow at DieHardMMAPod. That's right, I changed the Twitter handle. It fits perfectly now, so if you search for the Die Hard MMA podcast, you stand zero chance of missing me. At DieHardMMAPod. Give me a follow over there on Twitter. If I find any other plays I like, I will be tweeting them out. Also, be forewarned, if you're a family member following me here, I am inappropriate. I will curse, I will retweet things that are funny and highly inappropriate, and I use lots of Dragon Ball Z gifs in my tweets. So if that's not your bag, probably don't give me a follow. Also, since we mentioned Twitter, I gotta give a shout out to my boys Danny Lags, Rusty, Herman Martinez, and of course the OG Greamy. Those guys follow me and interact with me on Twitter with all of my MMA stuff. You guys have no idea how much I appreciate you, and it's an absolute blast having you guys on Twitter with me. So from the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you for all the support. So I'm gonna be real with all of you guys. A little peek behind the curtain here for you. I did a decent amount of recording and I just deleted all of it. This segment was recorded after a decent chunk of breakdowns for some of these fights on the undercard. I was looking at the undercard and there are some spots that I kind of like and I was just passing on all of them. We have 4 picks. That's our strategy for the main card. And I was going to pass on every single fight on the undercard due to conflicting information. And as I was talking about them and breaking them down for you guys and then just going, but I pass. But I pass. I'm not confident enough to get a pick here. I'm like, geez, like, what are you doing? Where are your balls? Like, we didn't get here with this record by me playing it safe. We didn't get to this point being undefeated in every single fight card, up 23.82 units on the year, by me passing on spots where I think we've got value. So I have deleted probably about an hour's worth of work, and I'm starting over because I'm going to give you guys the breakdown that you deserve, and I'm going to give you all the picks that I like. Hot take for you. I think if you blindly bet every single underdog on this card, you profit. I really think there are so many dogs that have a shot to win this, and some of these fights are so close with nice odds on these underdogs that if you just blindly did that, you would make money. We're not going to do that. We'll be a little bit more selective, but I actually think that that's going to run. I might keep an eye on these win-loss ratio here on this fight and see if I would have been right. We will go ahead and skip over Alex White versus Dan Moret. That's a loser leaves town type of fight, and I don't like either of those fighters in that spot. I'm just hoping it's an entertaining one to kick the night off, but I really don't see value either way. We are going to look at Alex Morono versus Zack Otto. Alex Morono is 15-6. Zack is 17-6. So really similar records here. Now, Alex is 28 years old, so he's a little bit younger. And since he came into the UFC, he won his first 2 fights before losing to Niko Price. Now, that loss was overturned to a no contest. He lost his next fight to Keita Nakamura and then bounced back against Joshua Berkman. He then lost to Jordan Mein and bounced back with the decision win against Keenan Song. However, that no contest with Niko Price was overturned because Niko Price popped for marijuana. That's right, not performance-enhancing drugs, marijuana. So as far as we're concerned, he has 3 losses on his record. And what that means is since he's been in the UFC, he's officially gone 4-3, and his wins over some trash cans and some aged fighters. Zack Otto has kind of a similar look. He's alternated wins and losses since he came into the UFC, so he is also a 500 fighter. However, his losses have come to Sergio Moraes, Jingliang Li, and Sage Northcutt. Now, all 3 of those names are relatively well-respected opponents. Alex Morono has lost to Niko Price, who is a respected opponent, but Keita Nakamura and Jordan Mein, I'm not overly impressed with. As far as UFC level talent goes, they're kind of bottom feeders. Zack Otto is not a special talent by any stretch of the imagination, and his last notable loss came to Sage Northcutt. Now, towards the end of Sage's UFC career, he really did start to put it together, and because of that, I think he actually caught Zack Otto off guard. I don't know if that fight goes that way if Zack Otto comes in prepared for the Sage Northcutt that we are familiar with today, and there is no shame in losing to Jingliang Li. That dude's a beast. So if we can put a little bit of an asterisk next to those 2, I think Zack Otto is the better fighter based on his level of competition. We can get Zack Otto at plus 170 at BetOnline right now, and I just think that's way too wide. Both of these guys are 500 fighters, and I really think this is going to be close. This is one of those fights I always talk about where we've got a coin and we're going to flip it and we're going to take the dog money on it, because I think Zack Otto stands a good chance of making this a real dirty, close, grueling fight, and if he does that, plus 170 is live going to the judges' scorecards, so let's lock up Zack Otto at plus 170. Next, let's move on to Luis Smolka versus Matt Schnell. This is a real exciting fight for me because I'm actually a fan of Luis Smolka. He's got a real solid ground game, and he's not so bad on the feet either. He's got 6 KO TKO wins, and he's got 7 submissions. Out of his 15 wins, only 2 of them have come by decision. He does have 5 losses, only 1 of them has come by finish. He's been submitted 1 time, and he's gone to the scorecards for the other 4 losses. Now, he's fighting Matt Danger Schnell, who is 12-4. When he first came to the UFC, the very first thing he did was get TKO'd by Rob Font, then he got KO'd by Hector Sandoval. He did rebound with 2 nice decision wins, however, he's 2-2 as far as UFC level competition is concerned. And one of those 2 wins is coming over Marco Cycle Beltran, who has lost his last 3 of 3, 2 of those coming by finish, giving him an overall record of 9-6, and he is likely not going to be fighting for the promotion any longer. Of these 2 fighters, I really think Luis Smolka has the higher ceiling, and it does look like he really has started to put it together. I think he's going to turn a page and really take off in his second run in the UFC, and he's going to get it started with a submission against Matt Schnell. Completely on the flip side from Smolka, of Matt Schnell's 4 losses, only 1 has come by decision, so the other 3 were all by finish. He also has 6 submissions on his record for a 50% submission rate, and what that means to me is both of these guys are probably going to look to take it to the ground, and I really think Smolka's just going to be able to out-scramble Matt Schnell. We can actually get a pretty sweet underdog line of Smolka wins inside the distance at plus 240, and I really think that there's just some solid value there. He is slightly the underdog in this fight. It's kind of a pick'em price at this point. I don't really think this fight goes to decision. I think Smolka goes for broke, and because of that, we're going to take the extra value on that plus 240 line. Next up, we got a battle between Maurice Green, 6-2-0, and Jeff Hughes. Both of them relative newcomers to the UFC. Maurice Green has had 1 fight in the UFC's octagon. He is 6-2-0. Jeff Hughes on the other side of the cage is 10-1-0. One of Maurice Green's 2 losses came at the hands of Jeff Hughes on the regional scene. So this is actually a rematch for Jeff Hughes's UFC debut, and it makes it a real interesting situation. They do a lot of times throw these young up-and-coming fighters at each other, but not this quickly as a rematch. Maurice Green is stepping in as a late notice replacement against Jeff Hughes, and it's crazy because his most recent loss is to Jeff Hughes, and it wasn't that long ago. 91% of the money has come in on Maurice Green. The line opened at about plus 180. And it hasn't moved that much. It's only down to about plus 170, plus 175. You can actually get plus 185 at BetOnline. And what that means is that 91% of the money on Maurice Green isn't really enticing the books to move the line all that much. I think that Jeff Hughes is a rightful favorite. He's got some KO power. Maurice Green didn't have a whole lot for them in the most recent fight, and this is happening too soon for him to really show up with a brand new bag of tricks. I don't expect Maurice Green to be able to do much differently than he did in their first fight. Now, I'm not going to give Hughes as an official pick because I do think the line is a little too wide. He is still about a minus 200, minus 210 favorite, and I'm not a big fan of laying that kind of price with a brand new fighter that we really don't know a whole lot about. I do expect him to win this fight, and if you like taking a shot and laying some chalk and you want some action on this fight, I would suggest you take Jeff Hughes. I'm not going to use him because I don't have another favorite on the card I like well enough to parlay him with, but I think that would be a good option for you if that's something you want to do to be able to get that line down to a reasonable amount. Up next, we're going to discuss a women's fight between Marion Reneau and Jana Konetskaya. Marion Reneau is 41 years old with a 9-4-1 record. Jana Konetskaya on the other side of the cage is 29 years old with an 11-4 record. So she's got a better overall record, she's got more experience, and she's younger. That would make her the easy play in this case, right? Wrong. Marion Reneau actually has a surprising chance in this fight. Jana Konetskaya's stand-up game is abysmal, and Marion Reneau actually is decently talented on the ground. She has 5 KO TKOs and 3 submissions in her game, and she's only won a single fight by decision. Now, when she does go to decision, she has 4 losses, so that's kind of the hole here in her game. Jana Konetskaya on the other side of the cage also has a lot of finishes. She's got 7 KO TKOs and 1 submission, only 3 wins by decision. Now, the losses is where I start to get interested. She's got 4 losses only, however, 2 of them have come by submission. So I really think that we have an opportunity for a finish here. Both of these girls are finishers. Both of these girls like to scrap. Marion Reneau actually had a unanimous decision loss to Cat Zingano just recently, and that was a very back and forth competitive fight, and Cat Zingano has got a ground game, let me tell you. The other thing you want to take a look at is before fighting Cat Zingano, Marion Reneau took Sarah McMahon down and submitted her with a triangle choke. Now that is something that you can hang your hat on. Sarah McMahon is a surprisingly solid fighter. Before she had lost to Caitlin Vieira and Marion Reneau, her only losses were to the crystal clear pinnacle of women's MMA. She lost to Ronda Rousey, Miesha Tate, and Amanda Nunes. And those are the top 3 names in all of women's MMA. Not only that, but after losing to those 3 women, she beat Jessica Ai by decision, and then she submitted Alexis Davis and Gina Mazzani. Her own ground game really is no joke. So Marion Reneau, I actually think, is the more dangerous of these 2 fighters. And even at 41 years old, she's competing with some of the best competition that the UFC's 135-pound division has to offer. And I just don't think Jana Konetskaya has that much of an advantage anywhere. Marion Reneau is going to be slicker and better on the feet, and I think that Jana Konetskaya leaves some holes in her ground game and is subject to being finished. So we are going to take a nice big fat gamble here, and we're going to take Marion Reneau inside the distance. That's right. We're going to bet on a women's fight to get finished before that final bell. Reneau inside the distance is plus 350. That's our ridiculous underdog line for the night, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to lock up Reneau inside the distance at plus 350 and hope she can get it done by ground and pound or lock up a submission when she gets on top of Jana Konetskaya once it hits the mat. Up next, we've got an interesting fight between Anthony Rocco Martin versus Sergio Moraes. Now, this is a really interesting fight. Now, I know I always say that, but I find all the fights interesting for different reasons, so get off my back. Shut up. Sergio Moraes is 14-3-1. Anthony Rocco Martin is 15-4-0. Sergio is 36 years old, so he's kind of getting towards that upper limit of the age there. He has 8 submission wins for a 57% submission finish rate. He's got 5 decision wins and 1 KO TKO. His only 3 losses, 1 has come by decision and the other 2 have come by KO or TKO. Now, 1 was early in his career against Brett Cooper way back in 2009. The most recent loss was a KO to Kamaru Usman. Now, after watching what Usman did to Tyrone Woodley, there is no shame in that loss. So I'm not worried about that at all. I'm going to put a nice little scratch through that. Without losing to Usman, he submitted Rene Forte, he submitted Neil Magny, he submitted Ben Saunders. He has a couple decision wins over Davi Ramos, Tim Means, and Zack Otto. I mean, this guy's actually put a decent looking winning streak together here at 170 pounds. Anthony Rocco on the other side is 29 years old, 15-4. He's got a very similar resume with 9 submission wins and 5 decision wins. His 4 losses have come split, 2 submissions, 2 decisions. Now, he did just submit Jake Matthews, which is impressive. He KO'd Ryan LaFleur, which is also impressive. His most recent loss came to OAM Olivier Aubin-Mercier, who is a ground specialist. He lost a split decision there, which means his submission defense is okay. I mean, he is apparently a solid grappler. If you can go all 3 rounds with OAM, that's saying something. But basically what it comes down to is both of these guys are finishers. Both of these guys are submission specialists. And one thing that we see regularly from Sergio Moraes is that he goes for broke and he gasses out. Both of these guys have quite a lot of late finishes on their records, and I think they're both going to look to get into title contention with this fight. So rather than picking a side here, we're going to do something a little unusual. Over at 5 Dimes, we can get a prop that the fight will not go the 3-round distance at -155, and I think that's a steal. Now, Both of these guys are capable of going the distance. They've both done it 5 times each. However, the majority of their wins have come by submission or by KO TKO. And even though they both have solid ground games, I really think one of them will gas and will get the opportunity for a finish here. So we're going to lay the minus 155 that this fight does not go the 3-round distance. And that brings us to the main card where Operation Underdog is underway. Like I said, we have four underdogs. That was the original strategy that we were going to stick to before I added all those crazy undercard plays here for you folks. And those 4 underdogs are going to be Tim Boetsch, Ben Rothwell, Niko Price, and Derek Lewis. So let's take a look at those lines first and foremost. We can get Ben Rothwell at plus 110 over at 5 dimes, Niko Price at 165 at Pinnacle, Boetsch at plus 115 at Pinnacle, and Lewis at plus 185 at 5 dimes. The idea here is that I think absolutely all 4 of these guys have the ability to win these fights. They are all very, very live underdogs. So the original plan was to take these 4 picks and hope to win 2 of them. Because if we win 2 out of 4 all on underdog lines, guess what? We lock ourselves up a nice positive night. If we hit 3 of them or all 4 of them, we're in for a massive night. So if you'd rather play it a little more safe, follow my main card strategy and lay off the undercard. I just can't help myself. When I see a good spot, I got to take it. So I got a couple of additional underdogs that I had to add on, but this is the main strategy that I planned to imply for UFC Wichita. Let's get into the breakdowns. First up, Tim the Barbarian Boetsch is fighting Amari Akhmedov. Tim Boetsch is 21-12. Amari Akhmedov is 17-4-1. Tim Boetsch has low-key been one of my favorite fighters in the UFC for a very, very long time. Anytime he steps into the cage, you know you've got an entertaining fight. He used to fight at 205 and he's down at 185 these days. He's sporting a 21-12 record, so not overly impressive. He's got 11 KO TKOs, 5 submissions, and 5 decisions. He does have a decent amount of finished losses as well, so he is kind of a die-by-the-sword type of fighter, which I love. I'm always a fan of those guys. He's also one of the most overlooked fighters in the UFC. One of my biggest ever sports betting cashes was when he fought Johnny Hendricks. Johnny Hendricks was just supposed to come in and steamroll him. They were giving you plus 500 for Tim Boetsch to win inside the distance, and he crushed Johnny Hendricks in the first minute of the second round. It was brutal, and I saw it coming a mile away. I'm hoping we can get a very similar outcome in this case. Boetsch has kind of edged off a little bit. His last 2 losses are to Antonio Carlos Jr. and Ronaldo Jacare Souza. Now, Jacare is a title contender and has been for a very long time. Antonio Carlos Jr. is another submission specialist. He lost by submission to both of those gentlemen in the first round. Now, Tim Boetsch's Achilles heel has always been the combination of wrestling and jiu-jitsu. If you get him down on the ground, he can muscle his way back to his feet. However, if you've got a slick submission game, he will catch you down on the ground. He's also been submitted by Luke Rockhold and Talis Ladies. But if that tells you the level of the fighter you've got to be able to submit Tim Boetsch, that's something. And he's the underdog to Amari Akhmedov here, and I just don't understand it. Now, I know Amari is a decent bit younger. He's 31 as opposed to Boetsch is 38, and he's got a 17-4 record. He's only sporting 4 losses. However, all 4 of those have come by finish. His most recent wins have come over Kyle Noak, Abdulrazak Al-Hassan via split decision, and then a draw with Marvin Vettori. None of those are overly impressive. The fact that he survived Razak Al-Hassan without getting KO'd, okay, that'll give to you. But winning the fight with another unproven fighter, that doesn't add a whole lot to his credit here. If you want an extra little gamble, I'm going to sprinkle Tim Boetsch KO rounds 2 and 3, because what Amari Akhmedov does is he goes after the wrestling game. He's not particularly a submission threat, really. He does have 5 submissions on his record, but again, let's look at the guys that have submitted Boetsch. Amari Akhmedov is nowhere near that. Something to bear in mind here is that Amari Akhmedov is coming from the 170-pound division moving up a weight class. Now, we know some people moving up a weight class have seen success. However, Tim Boetsch is a 205-pounder who moved down and is one of the few people who sees a lot of success moving down. It looks like he should have been at 185 all the time. So we've got a much bigger man moving down to 185, facing a guy who's been cutting and draining himself, finally deciding to move up. The last guy to end up in this spot against Tim Boetsch was, like I said, former UFC champion Johnny Hendricks. He was moving up from 170 pounds as well, thinking the weight cut deficit was going to be his key to victory. Tim Boetsch really showed the size advantage there. The stats here show that they are roughly the same height, but I expect Tim Boetsch is going to be the much thicker, bigger man when they finally face off and stand next to each other. I think he's going to have a real strength and power advantage, and that's going to get shown using his fists. I expect Marion to come out here and wrestle Tim Boetsch for maybe the first round. After that, he's going to get a little tired. Tim Boetsch is going to open up and start landing some shots. Once those shots start landing, Amari's going to have a hard time keeping up. I expect Boetsch to put him away in the second round. Maybe he'll get a late third round finish. Either way, at the underdog price, this is a good spot where you could take Tim Boetsch straight at that plus 115 price that we gave you a little earlier. However, I'm going to go ahead and actually jump over to 5 dimes and lock him up at plus 180 inside the distance. If you're getting a little more juice than that when the straight KO prop comes out, I would take that because I really see Tim Boetsch winning this thing inside the distance. But let's face it, it's not like he's going to submit on Marion Akhmedov. And I will be looking for a sprinkle of round 2 and round 3 for some extra juice. I like Tim Boetsch here a lot in a bounce back spot against a fighter that just isn't on his level. Next up, we're going to look at Blagoy Ivanov versus Big Ben Rothwell. Big Ben finally making his return to the UFC's octagon after a USADA suspension layoff. So I know that's going to make everybody cringe a little bit. That means he popped for performance-enhancing drugs, and whenever you take a layoff for that, you usually come back not quite looking the same. However, there have been some issues with USADA. They don't actually end up having the right guys all the time. I don't know how much of an effect this suspension is going to have on Big Ben Rothwell. Prior to the suspension, he was on a 4-1 streak. He had wins over Brandon Vera, Alistair Overeem, Matt Mitrione, and Josh Barnett. All 4 of those coming inside the distance. He lost to Junior Dos Santos via decision back in April of 2016. But what a record, man. He was on a tear at that point in time, kind of coming out of nowhere. Now, he's fighting Blagoy Ivanov, who's 16-2-0. Now, his only loss before he came over to the UFC was to Alexander Volkov back in 2014. He really came in riding high, and they paired him up also against Junior Dos Santos in his last fight. That was July of 2018. Now, Blagoy Ivanov really is one of the fighters in the UFC with the most padded records of all time. He came in and was supposed to give Junior Dos Santos a run for his money based on the fact that he has a massive finish rate. He's only got 4 decision wins. He's 16-2 and just absolutely wrecked everybody on the regional scene. Once he got to the UFC, however, a withered old 2018 Junior Dos Santos really put him in his place and took him the 5-round distance. Ivanov didn't have much to give Junior Dos Santos in that fight. Let's look at Big Ben Rothwell's experience compared to Ivanov's. You haven't heard of anybody on Ivanov's record beside the 2 guys that he's lost to. On the other hand, you know absolutely everybody that Big Ben Rothwell has ever fought. He's been in the UFC for years, and prior to the UFC, he fought guys like Andrei Arlovsky and Krzysztof Szulcinski and Roy Nelson. I mean, he was fighting the best of the best before he even got into the octagon. Ben Rothwell is a surprisingly athletic heavyweight. It's especially surprising looking at him because he's kind of got flabby dad bod and he's pretty hairy all over the place. He doesn't look overly impressive, but he's got really impressive footwork and movement for a guy that size. Ivanov, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. When we saw him against Junior Dos Santos, he was out of shape, overweight, and slow. Junior was able to use better footwork and movement to be able to outpoint him for that 5-round decision win. Rothwell, I think, is going to have a nice speed advantage, and I really expect Rothwell to get this thing done inside the distance. Now, once again, we would normally look to take this fight inside the distance because I expect Rothwell to just floor Ivanov and really make a statement coming back to the UFC. However, we don't know how that layoff and that suspension is going to affect him. The other thing in question here is the betting line, obviously, and Rothwell is plus 170 to win inside the distance. We are getting him at plus 110 to win the fight straight up. While I do think Big Ben Rothwell KOs Ivanov in this fight, there's just not enough extra juice on the line. So rather than run the risk of him having a ring rust type of fight and squeaking out a decision, we're going to go ahead and play him straight to make sure if that kind of thing does happen, we still stand a shot on the judges' scorecards. I expect Ben Rothwell to KO Ivanov, but let's play him at plus 110. Next up, we have Twitter's main event. Tim Dirty Bird Means is fighting Niko Price. Tim Means is 35 years old, 28-10. He has a ton of experience. Niko the Hybrid Price is only 29 years old. He is 12-2. And there's been a lot of speculation and arguing back and forth on this fight. Tim Means is just one of the most popular fighters on Twitter. A lot of people are so high on this guy, and he's just laid eggs in his last couple of fights. In Tim Means' last 5, he is 3-2 with submission losses to Alex Oliveira and then split decision losses to Sergio Moraes and Bilal Muhammad. Now, he did get a decision win over Alex Garcia and KO'd Ricky Rainey. However, those are much lower level competition fighters than the ones that he lost to. What I think we're seeing here is Tim Means actually falling into kind of a gatekeeper role. He's kind of a can crusher at this point. If you can get past Tim Means, then you are legit. However, if Tim Means drops you, that means you don't belong anywhere near the top 10 of the division. And given that, we're going to go ahead and take the gamble on Niko Price at plus 165. His only 2 losses have come to Vicente Luque via submission, and we all know that Vicente Luque has become a massive star in the UFC. He's put together a massive win streak over his last couple of years, and the future is looking really bright for him. So no damage whatsoever in losing to Vicente Luque a couple of years ago. His most recent loss by KO to Abdul Razak Al Hassan was actually really bad. That was a bad loss. It was a bad knockout, but I think Niko Price is just a young fighter who decided to get into a firefight with the wrong guy. He got KO'd in 43 seconds in that fight, and I really think he just underestimated his opponent. Lesson learned. Now he's going to tighten up and move on and not make the same mistake again. He is a finisher. He's got 8 KO TKOs and 3 submission wins, and the only decision he's ever gone to in his entire life was also a victory. He's got 1 KO loss and 1 submission loss, both to very credible, valid fighters. I really think that Niko Price is the new wave of fighter. Tim Means is only 35 years old, but he's got miles on him. Those losses were brutal. He's 28-10. He does have the experience, but man, he has been put away a couple of times, and I really think that's going to add up. I think Niko Price is better on the ground, and if it comes to a striking match, I think Niko Price is going to have a speed advantage and be able to out-brawl Tim Means. I hope he doesn't do that because that's how he lost his last fight. If he can get this fight to the ground or get in a scramble, I do think he can lock up a choke and finish it. Now, this is the kind of spot that I was talking about before. Niko Price is a nice size underdog at plus 160. You can go ahead and play him straight if you want to. What we are going to do on the podcast is we're going to look at him inside the distance at plus 260 because he's only been to decision 1 time in his entire career. And Tim Means is the kind of guy that will make you pay for a mistake. I think Niko Price either puts Tim Means away or he gets put away doing it. I don't see a whole lot of value in playing him straight. The line is nice, so again, if you want to play him straight, be my guest, go right ahead. We're going to play him inside the distance and get that extra value. Now, there are 2 fights on this main card that we are going to skip over. That's Beneil Dariush versus Drew Dober and Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos versus Curtis Millender. Those are 2 fights I'm going to avoid because they're very, very questionable and both guys are really evenly matched. Dariush and Dober are both very well-rounded fighters. I would lean Dariush, but the line isn't in any way giving me value for that kind of a pick. Dos Santos and Millender is another line it's essentially a pick'em, and they're very, very different fighters. And while I would lean with Curtis Millender due to the height and reach advantage, Dos Santos has a vicious, vicious punching game. And if he gets inside of Curtis Millender's distance game, he will end his night. So that one easily could coast to a decision and be a back and forth war. It also could end up with one of them on their back, and I'm just not sure which way it's going to go. Again, I lean Dariush, I lean Millender, but I'm not going to make an official pick on either one. That brings us to the main event of the evening. Junior Dos Santos, former UFC's heavyweight champion, returning against Derek the Black Beast Lewis, who is probably my favorite up-and-coming heavyweight besides Francis Ngannou. We talked about Junior a little bit when we broke down the fights with Ben Rothwell and Ivanov. Now, both of them last fought Junior Dos Santos. Junior Dos Santos' last fight, however, was tied to Avasa, in which he TKO'd the young up-and-comer in the 2nd round. Now, that was a really fun fight. I actually thought Tuivasa was going to get it done. He's a far more athletic heavyweight at this point, and Junior Dos Santos does have a questionable chin. He's been KO'd just way too many times, and the KOs that he suffered were brutal. Junior is very smart, though, and he knows his limitations at this point. So he's fighting a very, very smart game. He's trying to be more of a, I guess you'd say a point fighter, and he really is trying to go to decision a lot more often. If he finds an opening for a KO, he will take it, but the crushing, powerful Junior Dos Santos that we used to see is long gone. Junior's last 5 fights were a loss to Alistair Overeem via KO, a win over Ben Rothwell, a loss to Stipe Miocic via TKO, then Ivanov, then to Avasa. That's his fight history dating all the way back to 2015. Now, if we flip the page over here and take a look at Derek Lewis, he is 34 and just a massive, massive human being. If you want to go all the way back to his 2015, he comes in with 6 KO victories, only 2 losses in that spread, and then 2 decision wins. He is 8-2 in the amount of time that Junior has had 5 fights. Even though Derek Lewis is on the wrong side of 30, he is very much in the prime of his UFC career in my opinion. He also just recently had a title fight against Daniel DC Cormier, the greatest heavyweight of all time. That's right, I'm saying it, I'm going on record. I believe DC is the best of all time at heavyweight. Come at me. I think Derek Lewis actually learned a valuable lesson in that fight against DC. You could tell he really got serious. He talks a good game about not wanting the belt and not wanting the title, but when he got into title fight mode, he took it seriously. You could see that he was in much, much better shape going into the DC fight. Prior to losing to DC, he had been on a 3-fight win streak, including wins over Francis Ngannou, Alexander Volkov, and Marcin Tybura. Now, the Volkov win is one of the most spectacular finishes you will ever see. He had gotten beaten up for 3 rounds straight, and there were 11 seconds left on the clock when he finally decided to blitz and go for broke and put Alexander Volkov down. It was incredible. I gave out Alexander Volkov as a pick for that fight, and holy crap, I went nuts. I was doing the walk of shame. I was back getting an extra slice of pizza so I could eat my feelings away because I had told so many people that he was good by KO in this fight and that he would put Volkov down, and it was just such a depressing performance. And with 11 seconds left, he got it done. It was incredible. I went nuts. I almost threw pizza all over my father-in-law's house. It was great. That's just the kind of fighter that Derek Lewis is. It doesn't matter how late in the fight it is, he still has the ability to blitz and KO anybody on the roster. And like I said before, Junior Dos Santos has been brutally knocked out several times. He's slowed down a tick, and even though he is starting to fight a little bit smarter, I don't think he can keep Derek Lewis off of him for a full 5 rounds. This is the main event. It's going to be a 25-minute fight. If it goes all 5 rounds, Junior Dos Santos has the edge to win this thing by decision. However, I don't see it getting that far. At some point, Junior will slip up. At some point, Derek Lewis will either put him on his back or pin him up against the cage, and he will connect with that glass chin. I think Derek Lewis wins this fight in stunning fashion once again, maybe round 2, round 3, and we can get him at plus 225 to win inside the distance. It's a winning proposition. He has 21 wins. 18 of them have come by KO or TKO. That's just what he does. And the bookies are dumb enough to give us plus 225 on this kind of a fight. I legitimately believe he should be the favorite here rather than being the dog. You might be able to get just a little bit better of a line when the KO prop comes out. The only one out right now is 5 dimes inside the distance. So we are going to take Derek Lewis inside the distance at plus 225. Lock it up. Thank you for hanging in there with me, ladies and gentlemen. I know that went a little bit long, but we are set up and let's run through our picks. We decided to roll with Zack Otto at plus 170. We're going to take Smolka inside the distance at plus 240. Marion Reneau inside the distance at plus 350. We're going to take Moraes and Martin not to go the distance at minus 155. That's literally the only favorite line we will be taking on this evening's card. Big Ben Rothwell plus 110. Niko Price inside the distance at plus 260. Boach inside the distance at plus 180. Lewis inside the distance at plus 225. We're riding the dogs. They're going to get it done before the bell sounds, and we're going to have a massive, massive night. Thank you all so much for the love and support. Give me a follow, subscribe to the podcast, turn the bell on to get those notifications, hit me up with questions on Twitter and YouTube. I appreciate it. I love you all. Let's roll.